At TVC News, wherever the big news story is happening, we're geared up to break it. TVC News, first with breaking news.
Keir Starmer resigns as Prime Minister and Labour Party leader in emotional speech as he calls his tenure as proudest moment of his life and promises orderly handover process. Hello everyone, thanks for joining us. You're watching What Now? I am Precious Amayo, and the United Kingdom, rightly so, is a major focus today where the country is set for a 7th Prime Minister following the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announcing his resignation earlier today. Keir Starmer says he will do everything he can to ensure an orderly handover of power and will give his successor his full support. He mentioned that he inherited a Labour Party that was politically, financially, and morally bankrupt. He says he was told time and time again that the party was finished, but says he proved those people wrong. Keir Starmer says he will remain as Prime Minister until Labour chooses a new leader, which may happen by the time Parliament returns in September.
Every decision I've taken has been about putting the country I love first. That is why I will resign as leader of the Labour Party. I have spoken to His Majesty the King this morning to inform him of my decision. I will ask the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party to set out a timetable with nominations opening on the 9th of July and completed by the summer recess. In the case of a contest, this will ensure a new leader is in place before Parliament returns in September. I will remain in post as Prime Minister until the contest is complete.
Political commentator Nathaniel Oguniyi and CEO the Peace Alliance, former mayoral candidate Nibs Obunge, both joined me from the UK. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start with you, Names, because you and I have had this conversation over and over again, and you were very sure that Keir Starmer was going to make it through. He's now resigned, paving the way for a 7th British Prime Minister in a decade. I want to get your reaction first before Nathaniel.
Thank you. I think I was very clear that at the time Keir was going to stay as long as he could, and I think he has, but I think he's come up with a formidable opposition in the person of Andy Burnham. And that is where, that's been the game changer. I believe that Andy Burnham, as the mayor of Manchester, he was already a favorite in the eyes of many. And his election just very recently in Macclesfield is with the 54% majority that he achieved. And that included many reform voters, because you got to understand that the place where Andy got voted in, all the councillors there were reform councillors. So they voted for reform. But now what you find is reform only got about 34% or thereabout, and Andy got 54%. So there was essentially a shift. And like many people have acknowledged, that what reform had, even as reform councillors, you have Labour councillors or Labour individuals who have gone to reform because they were dissatisfied with the status within the Labour Party with Keir Starmer. So Andy potentially puts a challenge to reform by his coming in as an MP. Now, obviously, there's no certainty as to whether he will be the Labour leader, but most commentators believe that, and even within the Labour Party, I mean, there's a suggestion. Wes, who was going to be, he said he will stand as a leader, has supported Andy Burnham. And so we're looking at people like Yvette Cooper and Angela Rayner who might put their hat in the ring. But let's wait and see. Let's wait and see.
I don't know if I would agree, because I see you're smiling. I don't know if I would agree that Burnham is a game changer, because there's something about number 10 that seems to take the stars away. Whether it's Rishi Sunak or is Keir Starmer, they came in with very high approval rating, and then it tanks. Once you get in, it's like, the reality, it checks in. But I want to bring in Nathaniel to also get his reaction. We will get to that in just a moment. Nathaniel, let me get your reaction to this resignation as well.
Yeah, so now we see the resignation of Starmer this morning, less than 2 years after the election. As you know, he came into office with such ambition, with such high hopes. But I think the difficulty that Labour have run into now that they came in just under 2 years ago was actually there was a lack of planning for government. So there was a lot of election campaigning. There was a strong strategy for how to get into government, but there wasn't a lot of planning for what to do once you were there. And so that's why we've seen a number of U-turns. The government have announced policy and then announced that they've changed their mind in a number of areas. That's why we've seen a lot of high-profile U-turns, which have been politically damaging to the Prime Minister. They've weakened his authority, and they've ultimately resulted in his removal. And
I'm staying with you, Nathaniel. I want to get your reaction to the statement that the Prime Minister made. He said, and I'm quoting him, he said he has since, quote, changed our party, ripping out the poison of anti-Semitism, restoring trust on the economy, defense, and national security. Is that how the British public feels, especially because they were, like you mentioned, the backtrack when it comes to decisions?
So I think that might be a bit of political spin from the Prime Minister. You note that Labour are third currently, so they are behind Reform, who's on about 25% of the vote share. They're behind the Conservative Party, which is on about 20%, and they are close behind on about 18%. So they are the third most popular party in this country. The UK has traditionally had a two-party system. Of course, Reform are slightly changing that, but it's funny that Labour think that they are doing well coming third in what is traditionally a two-party system. The Labour Party, unfortunately, is incredibly unpopular, and so is Keir Starmer as leader. While Andy Burnham may have some personal popularity for now, it remains to be seen how long that popularity would last in office. Of course, once you have to start making decisions, once you start making trade-offs and facing the consequences, then the tone will rapidly change.
Same question for Nims, just in terms of how well he did in office. He seems to have rated himself so well. But how do you think that the British public see his 2 years in office?
Without a doubt, we still have the challenge with the cost of living crisis. I think we've got still issues with the NHS waiting list and healthcare reforms. You've got still an issue around immigration. So the issues around border management. You've got all these issues that are still real. And whoever, whether it's Andy Burnham or whoever is the next prime minister, has to deal with the issues of energy security, has to deal with the issues around, where we sit, even as a global leader. There are a whole raft of issues. I know that Reform is calling for an early election to challenge whoever comes in. And I think it's a space to watch and see. And like Nathaniel rightly said, Reform is still on the front. It seems to be it's doing quite well, and Farage is doing very well on the front line. But let's wait and see what happens in the coming weeks and maybe years. I don't know how long the next election will take, but it might be sooner than later.
And I'm staying with you, Nims. You mentioned earlier the transition process and the Burnham being the likely favorite, but that remains to be seen. But I want to stay on the comment made by the Prime Minister. He talked about an orderly transition. 3 months in between his resignation and the next Prime Minister, depends on when. That's when the Parliament will return in September. Does this seem like an orderly process?
Well, so here we have, he's obviously submitted this to the National Executive for the 9th of July, and Parliament reopens in September. Now, if there's no contest, then essentially whoever is the nominated individual will be in position pretty much immediately, and that should be a seamless process. But obviously, if there is going to be a contest, then what we have is a 3-month window within which the National Executive will have a system put in place, and we'll just find out what that system is. They will have an agreed pathway in order for us to find who the parliamentarians will decide to be their next leader. The only challenge for the British public is that is a decision that is made by parliamentarians and not by the British public.
And Nathaniel, I wanted to speak to that as well, because the impatience, British public is eager for a reset. When you look at all of the leadership in the last 10 years in the UK, they seem to want something new and something better. But it has to be in September. For those who are saying, why wait? Why not just do something now? How do you respond?
Yes, I think the base case is that you have Andy Burnham replacing the Prime Minister, and that could happen sooner than September. So you could sort of see this process concluding over the next few weeks rather than pushing it all the way to September. If there's only one potential or only one viable challenger, then we will see the process conclude in the next few weeks. If multiple candidates emerge, then that's when we push to September. But on the broader desire for change, it is one that we see, but that's partially a reflection of the government's failure to deliver. So the government came in, and one of their pledges in the Labour manifesto in July 24 was that we would have the second fastest growing economy in the G7. Since Labour has come in, that's not been true. In fact, we've had quarters where the economy has flatlined. We've had quarters where the economy has seen negative growth, in fact. So then you look at employment, for instance. Unemployment is rising because the government raised the costs for employers to keep people in jobs. And so you saw large employers in the UK, including supermarkets, cutting back on their hiring because they couldn't afford to keep people in jobs because the government raised their costs. So we see inflation above target. The Bank of England has a 2% target for inflation. Inflation was around the target when Labour came in July 24. Inflation is significantly above target, and it was above target before the war in Iran. Of course, that has had an impact too. But you see inflation high, you see unemployment high, you see the economy flatlining. I think that economic dissatisfaction has driven a lot of people's disappointment in the Labour Party.
So I'll put both of you on hold, and when we return, we'll continue the conversation, but that would be after the break. Stay with us, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. It's a new day. Hi, Olamide.
Hey guys, I'm just at the rooftop, keeping my finger on the pulse and my eye on the street.
Etoma, good morning. Hope you're up and ready for the show today.
Yeah, I just got to the office now. Have you contacted Abuja?
Hello guys, we are set and right on our way to the studio.
And the guest is standing by.
Hi, Ria.
I'm almost ready. Just let me get my gram for the show.
Good morning, Ibrahim. What about the dailies?
I just grabbed the papers. I'm on my way.
Good morning, guys.
Ria.
Good morning.
Olamide.
Hi, Brian.
Etoma.
Good morning, Nigeria. No one knows how the day will go.
But every day starts with breakfast.
So, starting right here on TVC Breakfast, every weekday at 7.
Thank you for staying with us, everyone. We've been discussing the resignation of the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He has resigned, but might likely stay in office till September, depending on when the process for the next Prime Minister to take office. We've been speaking with political commentator Nathaniel Oguniyi, and he joins us from the UK, as well as the CEO of the Peace Alliance and former mayoral candidate Nims Obunge, also joining us from the UK. Thank you both, gentlemen, for staying with us.
Thank you.
So let me start with you, Nims. Many have said that this is likely to become a coronation rather than a leadership contest, that Andy Burnham is likely to just take office, because Wes Streeton, who was seen as the next person to also challenge him, has supported him. Do you think that this is likely to be a coronation for him instead of a contest?
I believe it's very likely, obviously. One day in politics is a long time. There is uncertainty as to whether there may be a few individuals, like I alluded to, like Yvette Cooper. Some political commentators are suggesting people like Yvette Cooper might pop in, or Angela Raynham, but we never know. But I think the public opinion and media opinion. I've listened to a lot of commentators believe that Andy Burnham is going to be in, as you say, a coronation. I believe that's going to be more or less the pathway. And even you notice that even when he gave his speech after he won, he was trying to subtly give. He was giving more than the speech of an MP, but he seemed to be speaking to the nation. So I anticipate that's where we're going with this.
And every time you see him, whether he's giving a speech at the airport to just newsmen, you know, he's been carrying on that persona since the first time that the Prime Minister Keir Starmer was asked to resign. But Nathaniel, if he comes into office, as Andy Burnham comes into office without a contest, is he likely to face legitimacy questions?
Yes, he will do. And so you have a number of prominent Labour figures, one of them being Angela Rayner, who called for, following the resignation of Boris Johnson in 2022, for the Conservatives to hold a general election. And so their comments from back then will be brought to them. If they back then were asking for a general election before the country changes prime minister from one party leader to the next, then the question will be asked, why shouldn't that happen now? And you see a lot of them made speeches in Parliament or on social media making that point, saying that it was illegitimate for a party to change its leader without going to the country as a whole. So now, of course, those Labour MPs will have to argue against themselves. They'll have to argue why that they were wrong to say that originally, or they'll have to support those comments, in which case they'll have to call for a general election sooner rather than later. But Andy Burnham will face a number of challenges in office too. He will face all the challenges that Keir Starmer left behind, whether that's on defence. The UK has struggled to produce a defence investment plan, which would set out the government's priorities in terms of defence, what it wants to spend on the military and how it wants to use that influence. Starmer has struggled to get that through. And in fact, the defence secretary and a junior defence minister resigned because of that just last week. So difficulties like that, issues around the NHS, issues on migration, the flatlining economy, above target inflation that I talked about, all of those issues will be waiting for Andy Burnham or indeed anybody else who manages to make it to number 10.
And this question is for both of you, but I'll start with you, Names. Andrew Burnham is like, if he becomes a prime minister, he's likely to get a honeymoon period. It comes with the euphoria of approval ratings for a new prime minister. But again, we mentioned earlier that the British public is eager for a reset. So how long will he need, or how long will he need to stay in that office before he sets an agenda and move the country towards a reset?
Well, that's a great question. I think let's remind ourselves that Andy's already been challenged because of his statement when Liz Truss also had that whole moment of resignation where he called for a general election. And so he's been asked, well, listen, you did this. You asked for a general election when we had the scenario with Liz Truss. So how about you? And that was that was shortly before he even made it today to the swearing in the House of Commons. And what his response was, look, we've not even jumped the first hurdle. So there's going to be a constant pressure on him to make a decision to push for a general election. The media will continue to remind him of what he said. But then when we now look at the kind of expectations that would be placed upon him, and the honeymoon period will end very, very quickly, because he basically needs to roll up his sleeves and start responding to the issues like we've just been speaking to. The cost of living crisis is significant. We've got to recognize that the issues have not moved away, and the issues around housing is still a problem. House prices are unaffordable for many folks, and rents continue to rise. We've got to recognize that the whole issues around the concerns around food prices and energy costs, mortgages and rental pressure, all these pressures are real. And the cost of living crisis is, I suppose, front and center for many in the British public. And so they will be wanting to know how he's going to respond. He's going to also need to be seen as an international statesman because of the ongoing issues with the war in Ukraine. And how does he balance the tensions we have with Russia at the moment? And also, when issues with Russia is not just within Ukraine, but also within the United Kingdom, as we find certain concerns around our international waters. So we know that there are concerns that he has to respond to at this time. And I suppose, like Natalia alluded to, you might come into government, but you've got to have a plan to respond to these issues. And I think it was Nigel Farage who said that he wasn't part of the Labour manifesto when that manifesto came in. And so, how is he going to deliver on it? Those are questions that he'll have to respond to.
Absolutely. Nathaniel, I also want to get your reaction to how long you think the patience threshold of the British public will be when he takes office, or if he does take office.
I think it'll be short. I think you, as Prime Minister, people often talk about your first 100 days, but he has a short window for impact. He has a short period of time in which case he needs to announce policies and needs to hit the ground running. He needs to say things and announce policies, begin to deliver things that will cause genuine change in people's lives. And he needs to do that relatively quickly. If not, he will fall victim to the same trap that Starmer did, which was sort of wasting time in his first 100 days, allowing your opponents and other parties to set the tone, to set the political narrative, allowing them to dictate the conversation, and then you're late to the field, and then you're late to the game, and then it's gone, and then you've missed the bus. So I think he does need to focus on those first 100 days. He does need to have a policy blitz where he announces what his platform would be, because of course he hasn't yet done so, but he needs to announce what his platform would be, what policies he'd like to drive through, how he'd like to grow the economy, how he wants to bring waiting lists down, how he'd like to build more houses. He needs to do all of that in his first 100 days, and people need to see that there is a credible plan for change. Otherwise, he risks falling into the same trap as the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, did in his first 100 days.
So this question is perhaps will be the final question, but for both of you as well. I'll start with you, Nathaniel. This particular resignation is coming 10 years to the day since Britain voted to leave the European Union. Has Brexit sort of plunged the country into a decade worth of political instability?
Brexit was certainly responsible for the departure of a number of prime ministers. If you start with David Cameron, of course, he left because he supported the Remain campaign. And when Leave won on the 23rd of June, he felt unable to continue as prime minister following that. So that was certainly responsible for his departure. And equally, Theresa May, who held an election in 2017, she was then unable to secure an outright Conservative majority. So she then had to go into what's called a confidence and supply agreement, but she had to effectively pay other parties and make promises to other parties so that they would vote with her and vote with the Conservative Party in Parliament. Of course, her inability to get through a Brexit deal in Parliament led to her eventual resignation in 2019, which then brought in Boris Johnson, and he won his 80-seat majority back then. And that's almost the history of it. But there has been a Brexit impact, and the Labour Party somewhat has found Brexit a difficult issue to talk about, because in an area like Makerfield, where Andy Burnham has won, a majority of people in 2016 voted to leave the EU. But then Andy Burnham recently at the Labour Party conference last year said that he'd like to see the UK rejoin the EU. And so you'll notice that he's had to tone down those comments. He's not discussed the EU or indeed foreign affairs more broadly during this by-election campaign, because he knows his views are unpopular with some of that constituency. Right. There's only so long you can leave questions like that open for. There's only so long you can not answer those questions until you're Prime Minister, and then you have to make a decision.
All right, Names, same question to you, the impact of Brexit on the political stability in the UK.
I think that Burnham was a Remainer, and if it's interesting that Brexit has had a significant impact on the United Kingdom, without a doubt. There are some who believe that it has actually reduced our capacity in relation to being a strong player on the international playing field. But then at the same time, the impact it's had on our economy is subjective. Some believe it's helped our economy, but I think my personal opinion, not so much relevant, but I think that there have been some concerns as to the impact this has had. And one needs to know how you create healthy effort to reduce the trade friction where possible with the UK, with the EU and the United Kingdom. We also need to see what kind of closer cooperations we have in relation to defense and security, because we need to be working much closer together. I think there are concerns around the energy and industrial cooperation that needs to exist with the United Kingdom and EU. So there have been, without a doubt, there has been an impact. We've got to look at issues around the universities and how we strengthen relationships across the EU. So there's going to be a call for a stronger partnership with the EU, but I don't know that we can ever talk about returning. But I just think we need to look at how we have a more effective partnership with the EU in order to build business, build our economy.
Well, interesting comments from both of you. A lot to look at in the coming weeks in the UK. Political commentator Nathaniel Oguni, always a pleasure to have you, and thank you for talking to us. And CEO of the Peace Alliance, former mayoral candidate Nimso Bunge. I know this is not our final conversation on this. In the coming weeks, we'll have more conversation. Thank you both, gentlemen, for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to speak.
All right, that's what now. Thank you so much for watching. I am Precious Amayo.